Hello guys, welcome back to another video. And in this video we're going to talk about something which is very important before knowing the computer, which is CPU and GPU. So first we're going to talk about the CPU and GPU separately, then we're going to go over the differences, and then finally we're going to learn more about the GPU in depth. So let's get started. So first of all, before we go further, let us first go through the definitions of a CPU and a GPU. So basically what a CPU is that a CPU is known as the central processing unit, also called the processor, which we often say the processor, which runs our computer. So it is the central hub for our device and manages all the processes that make it tick. So basically whatever you're doing, whether you're clicking a picture, whether you are listening to audio, or doing calculations on a calculator, or playing games, or watching a video, whatever you do, it's basically the CPU which is helping you to do that. Now, without the CPU, your computer is nothing but just a piece of junk. So, moving on, let's go to the GPU, or the graphical processing unit. So, graphical processing unit is also known as the graphics card, which runs the graphics displayed on our screen. And GPUs are also vital to the operation of our computer. Without them, nothing would show on our screen. So basically, whatever video you're watching, you can't see them if you don't have a graphics card or a GPU. So moving on, the CPU is also known as the brain of every ingrained system. So basically, we can say like just humans have brain which controls everything. Similarly, CPU is the brain of every electronics that we see around us. Electronics performing complex logics and whatever. So your mobile phone, starting from a mobile phone to a very large computer to even a calculator performing simple calculations, have a CPU in them which helps them to control complex calculations. Okay, so a CPU comprises of arithmetical logical unit, which is basically used to store the information and perform calculations, and a control unit for performing instruction and sequencing as well as branching. Okay, and a CPU interacts with more computer components such as memory, input, and output for performing instructions. So let's move on. So moving on, we are going to learn about now the differences between a CPU and GPU. So a CPU and GPU can do a lot of different things the way they are built. So basically what does CPU does is run processes serially, that is one by one. Okay, so when we say that CPU has quad core or octa core, what it does is that it does the work one after the other on each of its cores. So most processors have 8 to 4 to 8 cores, though high-end CPUs can have up to 64 cores. So like think like 64 cores is a lot of you know lot of processes that it can do at a time. Uh, Now, when a computer is running, each core will run a process more or less by itself, like registering your keystrokes spell typing. While it does that, the other cores will be handling all the other processes you see running in your Windows Task Manager, or they will be waiting to run. So it manages tasks serially and dedicates a large share of its processing power to each task. It runs and switches between running different processes at lightning speed. So it is saying that when we open Windows Task Manager, okay, so let us open Windows Task Manager, and as you can see here that right now I'm using OBS, so and Task Manager and Google Chrome. You can see the CPU usage of each of these applications. Okay, so right now OBS is using almost 8.9% of the CPU, and others are also using around the background, doing all the work, whatever. So that is the thing. And a CPU approaches computing totally differently. When given a task, a CPU will subdivide it into thousands of smaller tasks and then process them all at once, so concurrently rather than serially. This makes the GPU much more suitable for handling large processes that are made of many small parts like 3D graphics. So let's say that there you are rendering something 3D, let's say from Blender. So what it will do is that it will break the entire process into several small processes. It will run that and then add up the run processes together and give you the final product. So basically, whenever there is no GPU in a game, you actually see, basically it's made up of few polygons. Okay, so what a GPU does is that it adds texture to the thing and makes it more and more realistic. It adds realism because a GPU works in functions in small processes. Therefore, the rendering is good in games and 3D if you have a GPU.